Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Ito po si Paul Dominic Otalasco at nandito po ang isang video discussion para sa Disaster Risk Reduction and Disaster Risk Management. Sana po ay may matutunan po tayo sa discussion na ito at sana ay mas magkaroon po tayo ng kakayahan na protektahan ang ating komunidad at ang ating mga pamayanan sa pamamagitan ng pagkakaroon ng mas malawak na pag-intindi sa mga disasters at kung paano ba natin sila mas lalong mapaghandaan. No? Now, the word disaster is derived from the Middle French disastre. No? At yun namang disastre na yun, mula naman yun sa Old Italian word na disastro. No? At yung Old Italian na yun, nanggaling din sa Ancient Greek prerogative the prefix na dus o ibig sabihin ay bad, no? At ang aster o ang star, no? So, yun ang pinakasimula ng salitang disaster, bad star. Kasi nga naniniwala sila noon, they believe that the root of the word disaster, bad star in Greek, comes from an astrological sense of calamity blamed on the position of planets, no? So, yun ang kanilang kaisipan noon na ito po ay isang bagay na bigay ng mga forces na wala tayong control. Well, of course, wala din naman tayong control sa mga disaster, pero may control tayo kung paano ba natin mamiminimize, no, marireduce at mamamanage, mamimitigate yung epekto ng mga disaster. A disaster is a major crisis that occurs over a short or long period of time and results in widespread human, material, economic, or environmental loss that surpasses the affected communities or society's ability to deal using its own resources. Hindi dahil umulan, lumindol, disaster na yun. Matatawag lang natin na disaster ito pag hindi na po kaya ng isang community o ng mga tao yung epekto ng disaster. Kasi pwede namang umulan, pero alam mo yun, kaya naman nilang mamuhay ng ordinaryo. Kaya naman nilang mamuhay, punta sa eskwelahan, punta sa trabaho, at gawin yung mga makakaya nila kahit umulan or kahit lumindol. No? Disaster lamang po ito pag hindi na nila kayang gawin yung mga kailangan nilang gawin sa araw-araw pag nagkaroon ng sira, no? Sa kanilang mga economic na buhay, sa material na buhay, sa environmental, at kung may sakuna, may napahamak na kapwa-tao. Yun po yung tinatawag natin na disaster. Disasters are generally classified as natural or human-instigated disasters. No? Natural and human-instigated disasters. No? Now, matatawag natin na natural disaster ito pag ang nagko-cause nito ay mga natural hazards, no? Mga bagay na wala tayong control, mga acts of God, no? Yung tinatawag natin. And of course, tinatawag naman natin na human-instigated catastrophe pag produced by anthropogenic hazards. Again, anthropogenic hazards na ibig sabihin, may kinalaman po ang mga tao sa pagkakaroon ng disaster na yon. However, in current times ngayon, distinguishing between natural, man-made, and even man-accelerated disasters is challenging kasi nga nagkakaroon ng domino effect ang mga pangyayari, at kung minsan ay kahit masabihin natin acts of God, dahil din sa kasalanan ng mga tao ay nagkakaroon ng domino effect ng mga disasters, mas gumagrabe, no? Magbibigay tayo diyan ng example later on. When a disaster strikes, developing nations bear the highest costs, such as, of course, Philippines at yung mga ibang mga mahirap na bansa. Ayon sa data, no, more than 95% ng namamatay sa hazards, nangyayari ito sa mga developing countries. And losses due to the natural disasters are 20 times higher in developing countries compared to industrialized countries. Disasters occur when a community is inadequately resourced or structured to endure the effect, and whose population is susceptible due to poverty, isolation, or being socially disadvantaged in some way. Of course, pag yung isang komunidad, mahina na talaga yung kakayahan niya, no? mas lalong magiging malakas ang epekto ng isang kalamidad sa kanya. tulad din ng isang tao, kung mahina yung kanyang immune system, mas lalo siyang magkakaroon ng severe na epekto ng isang sakit. No? Now, i-compare natin sa komunidad yon. Of course, there are some communities na medyo mahirap yung mga nandoon, no? And ikumpara mo, pag binagyo sila at binagyo yung mga mas mayaman, of course, yung mga mas mayaman, mas maganda yung bahay nila, mas maganda yung pundasyon, no? And of course, kahit anong mangyari sa kanila, no? They could bounce back. May naipon silang pera, may iba silang bahay na pwede tuluyan, pwede silang magpagawa agad ng bahay. But isipin natin yung mga kababayan natin, no? Na hindi naman ganon kaganda yung buhay nila. Pag bumagyo, lumindol, pag nasunugan, paano sila magpapatayo agad ng bahay, no? So most of them walang kakayahan na ganon, no? And of course they need to work during the disaster, so that's a loss of income for them, no? And tuloy-tuloy po yun. Now compare it sa mga bansa, no? Sa Pilipinas kasi we are doing all the good things, no? But it's pag i-compare natin sa disaster relief operations sa ibang bansa, of course, mas organisado sila kasi mas marami silang resources, no? Now, isang napagdaanan natin na disaster, yung pandemic, yung COVID, na hanggang ngayon meron pa rin, no? 2022, no? And there are other countries na mas maganda yung bakuna nila, mas maganda yung rollout na mas mabilis sila na nagkaroon ng response, no, sa COVID. And sa atin naman, we are doing the best that we can. DOH is doing the best that it can, no? The officials are doing their best, no? But it could not be compared to the responses of industrialized countries. Why? Because they have more resources than us, no? So, yun. Nonetheless, we should remember that disasters may and should be avoided. We can even avoid hazards from causing catastrophes by assisting communities in being more prepared, in reducing their risk, and becoming more resilient. Now, in the context of disaster catastrophe, these initiatives are becoming increasingly critical. Global warming is already killing people and destroying lives and livelihood every year, and the situation will only worsen unless fast and decisive action is taken. And right now, we could feel the effects of global warming. Napapansin po ninyo yung mga bigla-biglang pag-ulan, no? Tapos maaraw, tapos biglang uulan, tapos mawawala ulit. Summer, pero maulan, no? It should be rainy days, pero sobrang mainit, no? So those are the things that we should worry about. Now, complex disasters where no underlying cause can be identified are more likely to happen in developing nations. A specific disaster may cause subsequent disaster that has a greater impact. No? So parang domino effect yan. A famous example of this is yung nangyari po sa Japan. No? There was an earthquake, and after that earthquake, nagkaroon ng tsunami, which causes coastal flooding, and hindi pa natitigil doon. No? Nagkaroon din ng damage sa nuclear power station sa Fukushima. No? So take note, from earthquake it became a tsunami, flooding, then it became a danger, a possible disaster doon sa kanilang nuclear power station, no? So we should take note of that, no? We should take care, and I hope that our government officials would think very long and hard in deciding where to put nuclear power plants. No, do not put them in places where disasters might strike, because mas malalang disaster ang mangyayari kung sasabog yan, tulad po ng nangyari sa Chernobyl, no, na it causes widespread radiation, no. So wag sanang mangyari yan sa atin, no. Now, there are some man-made calamities such as smog and acid rain, no, na noong una ay sinasabi natin na ayon na dahil sa nature. Pero yun pala ay mga tao mismo ang nagdala nun, no? Because we're not taking good care of our environment. And of course, we should also understand that there are some studies that does not really distinguish between regular and unexpected phenomena, no? Tulad ng seasonal floods, tulad ng mga locusts, no? Mga peste, no? May maganda akong article na nabasa tungkol sa Tacloban that reflects what I would like us to understand with our lesson right now, that We could not control when disasters would strike, but we could at least mitigate its effect, and we could at least prepare for it. And one such example here is Tacloban. No? Now, from the article that is present at your screen, it would say that from a natural hazards perspective, Tacloban would also be high up on the list of the most dangerous medium-sized cities in the world. Isa sa mga pinakadelikado in terms of natural hazards perspective. Why? Kasi yung location daw ng Tacloban City, daanan daw talaga ng bagyo. No? And of course, pagdaanan ng bagyo, would expect it would always go there. It's not its fault. Hindi po natin sinasabi na it's cursed, no, or whatever, no. It's just the way that science is, no. Diyan talaga ang daanan ng bagyo, no. Tacloban is very much the front line of a tsunami, of a possible tsunami. The biggest city on a low ground facing the open Pacific, no? And take note, a tsunami na kahit 10 meters lang daw, no, it would cause more casualties and destruction even than a 2013 storm surge na tulad ng nangyari sa Yolanda. So, yun daw ang suggestion ng ng mga experts, no, na sana kasi ang nangyari kasi sa Yolanda sa Tacloban, it also happened back then during the Spaniards' time. At may mga records po tayo dyan, no? The Spaniards are telling us that Tacloban has been decimated by typhoons even back then, no? So, sana, hindi na sana maulit yan. Sana the government would do something for Tacloban, no? But nonetheless, the fact remains that Tacloban has the potential to recur on the list of future catastrophes. And it said that only action in reconstruction and relocating the city away from the low-lying coast can reduce that potential. So, yun. Sana we listen to science. Sana we listen to the experts. No? Kasi if we will not listen to them, para saan pa? No? Let history repeat itself again. A natural disaster defined as the negative impact after an actual occurrence of a natural hazard that seriously impacts a community. So we could say that a natural disaster can result in loss of life or property damage as well as on the economic impact. The intensity of damage is determined by the resilience of the affected people as well as the existing infrastructure. Now, ano-ano ba yung mga examples ng mga natural disaster? Avalanche, coastal flooding, cold wave, drought, earthquake, hail, heat wave, hurricane, tropical cyclone, ice storm, landslide, lightning, river flooding, high wind tornado, tsunami, volcanic activity, wildfire, winter weather, etc., etc. Marami. Okay, so marami talagang disaster and hopefully marami din tayong solusyon para ma-mitigate po ang mga ito. The distinction between natural, man-made, and man-accelerated disasters is difficult to discern in modern times. No? Human decision and activities such as architecture, engineering, fire, resource management, and even climate change can contribute to natural catastrophes. Indeed, the phrase natural disaster was labeled as a misnomer as early as 1976. A disaster occurs when a natural or man-made hazard affects a vulnerable community. A disaster is caused by the combination of a hazard and the exposure of a susceptible society. Natural disasters can be exacerbated by poor building standards, marginalization of people, inequality, resource overexploitation, excessive urban development, and climate change. The fast rise of the world's population, as well as its greater concentration in dangerous areas such as Tacloban, has increased the frequency and intensity of disasters. And of course, we should also consider that there are some buildings which do not follow the building code. No? Hindi po medyo maganda yung pag-engineer sa kanila. And this could make disaster-prone areas more vulnerable due to the tropical environment and unstable landforms, as well as the deforestation and uncontrolled growth proliferation. Natural catastrophes strike developing nations on a more or less regular basis, owing to inefficient communication and insufficient budgetary allocation for disaster prevention and management. Human-caused disasters are the result of technical or human dangers. War, social unrest, stampedes, fires, transportation accidents, industrial accidents, conflicts, oil spills, terrorist attacks, and nuclear radiation are all examples of this. The more cosmic possibilities of catastrophic climate change, nuclear war, and bioterrorism are examples of these calamities. But according to one viewpoint, all disasters are caused by the inability of humans to implement effective emergency management systems. No? So, kasalanan daw natin kahit anumang calamity yan kasi nga it has been there. The science is there. We are expecting a disaster one after another. But what are we doing to prepare for it? No? So, for example, famines may be produced locally by drought, flood, fire, or plague. But there is enough food internationally in modern times. And chronic localized shortages are usually the result of government mismanagement, violent conflict, or an economic system that does not distribute food where it is needed. No? So for example, let's go to Urdaneta. No? Now, there are some families there na nahihirapan na magkaroon ng pagkain, correct? But how come maraming mall sa Urdaneta? Sa mall, madaming kainan. No? So, yun yung isang example dito. There is so much food for everyone na maraming spoilage. Pero bakit may mga batang nagugutom? No? And that's that's something to think about. No? Sana po hindi po mangyari. No? I just watched an Indian film, RRR. No? So, if you haven't watched it, watch it. It's awesome. But basically, may line doon na a child must not know hunger. No? Ang isang bata, hindi na dapat malaman kung ano yung gutom. No? So, yun. And talking about famine, and talking about children going into hunger, I guess we should talk about the Negros famine, no? Na nangyari sa bansa natin mismo. And hopefully, wag sana natin makalimutan, and hopefully we should learn from it. No? The link of this article is there. I think it's on your screen, and I think mas maganda kung tingnan po natin ito. If you have a free time, we could read on it so that we could know more about what happened in Negros and what could be unpacked from there, and so that we could do whatever is necessary so that that will not happen in our own community. No? But basically, Negros famine is caused by mismanagement, no? Ng mga taong nasa taas. And sana wag yung mangyari. No? Kasi nga, tinan niyo naman ng epekto. The famine in Negros affected an estimated 1 million people and sparked a worldwide firestorm. Take note of the girl, no, or the child sa picture ninyo. She died afterwards, no, after the picture was taken because of hunger. No? So, yun. And also, experts would say that this is the reason why nadoble daw yung mga NPA in this area. Sabi nila, no? Why? Because so much hunger, walang pagkain, there's no source of food. So namundok na lang daw yung mga tao, no? Because of being disillusioned by the government. But nonetheless, this is something that happened in our community, no? Hindi sa community natin, but in the Philippines. And hopefully, wag sanang maulit. No? Because wala namang kinalaman ng mga tao. Yung batang yan, wala naman siyang kinalaman sa nangyari doon sa government decisions, no? Sa mga nasa higher ups. No? So, why did these people suffer when it's not their fault? Okay? Disaster Risk Reduction, or DRR, is sometimes known as Disaster Risk Management, DRM. No? It is a systematic technique for detecting, analyzing, and mitigating disaster hazards. And it seeks to lessen socioeconomic vulnerabilities to disasters while also addressing the environmental and other risks that causes them. The most commonly cited definition of disaster risk reduction is the one used by United Nations agencies such as the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDDR, and of course ng United Nations Developmental Program, or UNDP. No? It cited disaster risk reduction as the conceptual framework of elements considered with the possibility of minimizing vulnerabilities and disaster risk throughout a society, and of course to avoid or prevent or limit through mitigation and preparedness the adverse impacts of hazards within the broad concept of disaster risk reduction. Since the mid-1970s, vulnerability research and natural and disaster risk mapping had a significant impact on disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk mitigation is under the purview of both developmental and humanitarian organizations. It should be an intrinsic element of how such groups execute their business, not an afterthought or a one-time event tulad ng nakikita natin. No? Disaster risk reduction has a far larger and deeper reach than traditional emergency management. And most fields of development and humanitarian work have the potential to implement disaster risk reduction efforts. Since the 1970s, disaster thinking and practice have evolved to include a progressive, broader, and deeper understanding on why disaster occur, as well as more integrated, holistic approaches to reducing their impact on society by reducing risk before it occurs and managing impacts after disaster occur. It is extensively supported by international organizations, governments, catastrophe disaster planners, and civil society organizations. DRR is such a vast concept that it has been difficult to describe or explain in detail, even though the fundamental notion is evident. Various definitions exist in the technical literature, but it is widely recognized to mean the comprehensive creation and deployment of policies, strategies, and practices to reduce vulnerabilities and disaster risk throughout society. The phrase disaster risk management is frequently used interchangeably and to signify much the same thing: a systematic strategy for detecting, analyzing, and mitigating risks linked with hazards and human activities. It is most appropriately applicable to DRR operational aspects, the practical implementation of DRR projects. The idea of resilience describes one aim of disaster prevention and response in disaster risk reduction: the ability of a group or society to maintain its core structure and function in the face of stress and shocks is referred to as resilience. Resilience and vulnerability are closely related concepts, yet resilience is a higher strategic objective of developing social systems, whereas vulnerability is a method for studying the features of those systems. Within the field of disaster risk reduction, one widely accepted definition of resilience comes from the United Nations. Resilience is the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate to, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. So ang kailangan natin dito, pag resilience ang pinag-uusapan, paano makakabangon muli ang community. In the issue of disaster risk reduction, there are certain challenges, there are certain issues that we should take into consideration. The first of which is priorities. According to Maluver in 1996, expecting development in all aspects of DRR is very unrealistic. Bakit? Because we do not have infinite resources. We do not have infinite capacities. Capacities and resources are always lacking. Governments and other organizations must make investment decisions, determining which components of DRR to invest in, when, and in what order. At napapalala pa ito due to the fact that many of the measures advised are developmental rather than disaster-related. We should start even before the disaster strikes. The majority of present DRR guidelines avoid this issue. One approach is to include those acts that are particularly designed to lower disaster risk. This would, at the very least, set it apart from more broad attempts for sustainable development. This is attempted by the concept of vulnerable development, which is defined as development directed towards reducing vulnerability to disaster, which includes decisions and activities that are intentionally designed and implemented to reduce risk and susceptibility, as well as raise resistance and resilience to disaster. Another issue and challenge is coordination, particularly between the partnerships and inter-organizational coordination. In fact, there is no single entity or organization that can address all aspects of DRR. Tulad mismo dito sa Pilipinas, there are so many agencies na tinatap natin pag mayroong disaster. There's DSWD, DOH, DepEd, the Army, the PNP, the PDRMC, of course the municipal government, the provincial government, of course marami pa po, NEDA, no? Ganon. Disasters, according to DRR philosophy, are complex situations that require a communal solution. Even in traditional disaster management, coordination is challenging. Several organizations may descend on the disaster location to assist. Relationships across sorts of organizations and sectors grow significantly more comprehensive and complicated across the DRR spectrum. Disaster risk reduction needs strong vertical and horizontal connections. Involving civil society organizations should imply thinking widely about the sorts of organizations to involve in. Kailangan nating magtulong-tulungan at sana these agencies hindi sila magpapataasan ng ihi, no? Or sana hindi sila magpapapel, no, sa isa't isa. One disturbing trend among disasters in the Philippines, at hindi naman natin lahat, no, lahat ng officials, no, sometimes they see disaster as a way to raise their political stock, no? Magpaganda, magpapogi sa mata ng mga botante, no? And sometimes it creates more issues, no? Kasi hindi nakakagalaw yung mga tao sa baba kasi naghihintay kay mayor bago magbigay ng ayuda. Bato-bato sa langit, ang tamaan, wag po sana akong ipahanap. No? So nakikita naman natin na ganun. And sana hindi ito mangyari. Sana totoong serbisyo lang. Pero kung makakatanggap ka ng relief goods na may muka ng isang official, mag-isip-isip tayo kung bakit ganun. No? Now, there are two false assumptions about communities made by traditional emergency management or civil defense. No? For starters, ang kaisipan nila, nire-regard nila yung alternative types of social organization, no, as irrelevant to emergency response. Kasi ang nasa isip nila, because they are not regulated by authorities, so wala silang control sa mga NGO, wala silang control sa mga volunteer organizations, no? Itong mga spontaneous acts by impacted communities or groups are considered unimportant or disruptive. At do not tell me hindi ito nangyayari. Take note kung ano yung nangyari doon sa community pantry, di ba? So that's one example. And the second assumption is that disasters create passive victims who are overwhelmed by the situation or exhibit dysfunctional behavior. No? So, yun. Akala nila, mga biktima sila na kailangang isalba. So, hero complex ng mga rescuers. No? I need to rescue you because you need help. You need me. No? So, as a result, no, ang assumption nila, maling assumption nila, people must be taught what to do and their conduct must be regulated. In extreme circumstances, we are imposing martial law. No? So, there is a wealth of sociological studies to disprove these two myths. A different point of view, backed by a large body of research, emphasizes the role of communities and local organizations in disaster risk management. The rationale for community-based disaster risk management is that it responds to local problems and needs, capitalizes on local knowledge and expertise, and of course, it is cost-effective, increases the likelihood of project sustainability through genuine ownership, and it also strengthens community technical and organizational capacities, but the most important of all, it empowers people by giving them the opportunity and capability to face this and other challenges. And it has been seen, it has been observed in every instance that local people and organizations are the primary players in risk mitigation and disaster response. As a result, it has been demonstrated that knowing the social capital currently present in the community may considerably assist in lowering the risk at the community level. TLDR, pag pinalakas natin ang community, mas mabilis silang makaka-recover sa disaster. Of course, let's talk about governance. The disaster risk reduction strategy necessitates reframing government disaster reduction's function. National governments are widely agreed to be the primary actors in disaster risk reduction. They must ensure the citizen safety, the resources, and capacity to implement large-scale disaster risk reduction. And of course, they have the authority to direct and coordinate the work of others, and the responsibility to develop the necessary policy and legislative frameworks. These rules and programs must be consistent. And of course, another topic that requires examination is the connection between the central government and other players. Most countries, they delegate risk management to local governments. No? At sa atin, yun din ang ginagawa natin. Kaya sa bawat munisipyo, we have the municipal disaster risk reduction programs. No? And of course, meron din tayo dyan sa provincial. No? The most generally utilized instrument in metropolitan areas is the local development plan na dapat ay meron tayo. No? Nonetheless, sana magkaroon tayo ng batas that this plan, no, this emergency and disaster risk reduction plans, no, they should be updated frequently, every 4 to 5 years. No? And of course, larger cities prefer standalone plans, no? Kasi nga mas maraming tao ang nasa kanila. No? This should be referred to as sustainable, no? At may mga mitigation or green plans depending on the setting. In rural regions, no, risk reduction programs are incorporated into the municipal development plans. This procedure frequently collides with a shortage of funding or systems for shifting resources from the national to the local budget. No? Too often, plans fail to include local, scientific, and technological expertise. Finally, they delegate policy implementation to individual residents without fully including them in the decision-making process. And this create problems. No? If you don't know what the people need, you may not give them what they need to recover from the disaster. So they must be an authentic community representation and of course involvement, no, from every sector, from the females, no, from children, no, from LGBTQ, from farmers, no. They should be involved in decision making. No? That should be the goal of local development plan. No? And of course, the main goal talaga natin here is to reduce disaster risk. No? And everyone could contribute something. Walang maliit na ambag, kaya natin na magtulong-tulungan. No? We also have here accountability and rights. The concept of accountability is the heart of meaningful engagement and involvement in disaster risk reduction. It applies to both government institutions that are held responsible via the democratic process and the private sector and non-profit groups that are not held accountable through the democratic process. Accountability is a new topic in disaster relief efforts. Accountability should be aimed especially at people who are vulnerable to and impacted by dangers. Much international assistance and development organizations are increasingly subscribing to a rights-based strategy, karapatan. Take note, ayuda, pagbibigay ng ayuda, nagpapasalamat tayo sa nagbibigay, correct. But what we are lacking in understanding is those that are being given to us, that is our right. Karapatan natin yan. So why should I kiss your ass just for you to help me out? Tama? No? So, the language, I apologize for the language, pero sana ganyan yung kaisipan natin. Hindi dahil tinutulungan tayo na, uy, may utang na loob ako. No, that's your right. Karapatan mo yan. No? You're paying your taxes for the government to do it. So, hopefully, naman hindi dapat ginagamit ito sa politika. No, tulad ng nasabi ko kanina, sometimes a bad thing that's happening is pag may kalamidad, ginagamit na political issue. So, wag naman sana ganun. No? And of course, isipin natin, if there's a calamity, no, we should always respect the human rights of people. No? Kasi kasama yan. No? The language of rights may be employed by everyone. No? But the problem here is that napaka-ambiguous ko minsan. So there's a danger of misunderstanding, there's a danger of your human rights to be trampled upon. No? So wag na kayong bumalik dito, wag na kayong whatever. No? So yun ang hindi naiintindihan kasi ng mga tao. No? Lalo na pag may people in authority. Of course, we respect their mandate. No? But at the end of the day, you guys work for us. Right? You guys work for us. We are your boss. Our taxes is the payment. We are paying our taxes for you to afford your salary or whatever. No? So hopefully sana may respeto sana. Kasi kung minsan kasi kinakawawa kasi yung mga taong nasa laylayan. No? So wag naman sanang ganun. And of course, we should also talk about gender. Disaster risk does not discriminate based on gender. And according to research, disasters disproportionately affect women and girls. So, for example, na sinabi natin dito, following the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, females accounted for 77% and 72% of mortality in the Indonesian districts of North Aceh and Aceh Besar, respectively. So, in India, 62% of those who died were female in that disaster. And this is due to socially established gender roles that dictate what standards and actions are acceptable for men and women, as well as for girls and boys. Sabi kasi nila, due to traditional gender roles, women in particular prefer to take on home-based chores and may be hesitant to leave their possessions in the event of danger notice. And they frequently do not practice survival skills that might aid in catastrophes, such as how to swim or climb. So, yun ang sinasabi sa report natin. Now, a gender-sensitive sensitive strategy would assess how disasters affect men, women, boys, and girls. And it should modify the plans to reflect people's unique vulnerabilities, concerns, and needs. And here's another article that I saw, Typhoon Haiyan, Women in the Wake of Natural Disasters, yung link nasa baba. And it's something that we should read to make us further understand more yung pinupunto ko kanina na kailangan natin pag-usapan din ng gender sa disaster risk management. According to this article, there is an increase in violence against women and girls noong Yolanda. But based on experience, I know for a fact that there is really an increase in violence against women and girls pag may kakaroon ng disasters. So yun yung isang problema, at ang isang kasi one cause of here is representation. Mas kokonti din kasi yung mga pulis na babae kaysa sa mga lalaki na nagte-take up ng at ang problema dito pag walang representation, women, kaming mga lalaki, we couldn't understand or mahirap naming ibigay yung kailangan ninyong mga babae. Pero sana kung mas marami sana tayong mga pulis na babae, mas komportable sana yung mga yung mga tao na nasa disaster na kausapin sila pag magkaroon sana ng balance. Kaya nga natutuwa ako at marami tayong mga estudyante ngayon na babae sa criminology. Go mga kapatid, kaya po natin yan. Now, ang isang problema din natin sa mga kababaihan sa disasters, hindi kasi nabibigyan pansin ng mga needs nila. So for example, pag meron silang period, pag meron silang menstruation, wala namang supply ng sanitary napkins yung yung sa mga disaster relief operations. So that's a problem. And wala din tayong parang kulang tayo sa facilities. How do we respond to pregnant women kung may disasters? So I guess that's another topic that we should consider. And of course, the risk of STD, yung mga pregnancy operations, those are the things that we should also take into consideration. And how about the privacy of these women kung sila po ay nasa disaster relief operations? How could we make sure that they are safe, na hindi sila nabobosohan pag naliligo, hindi sila nasisilipan, or how could we be sure that protektahan natin sila? So those are the things that we really should should consider. No? Again, maganda tong article na to. Providing care towards women and girls during disaster relief is just one step in addressing the larger problem of violence against women. So we should work hand in hand in here, no? So yun sana, mga kaibigan. Irespeto ang mga kababaihan, no? Now, disasters are typically considered as a catalyst for including the process as the community rebuilds. No? Disasters, in some situations, they emphasize community concerns more than normal operations, and they put everything under pressure. Disasters may also be used to put to the test the progress that the community has made via community development, albeit that is not a test that anybody looks forward to. As a consequence, including disasters as a feature in community development plan can be immensely advantageous later on when they occur. One of the most effective methods to employ community development is to rebuild and restore a community following a disaster. After all, it is intended to take bad or dangerous situations and improve them to solve the issues they produce. The community development process will normally follow the same order and technique as it would in any other circumstance when applied after a disaster. The fundamentals will not change, but their application to the circumstances may. It's generally a unique collection of difficulties with a limited quantity of resources accessible right now. Now, it is essential to consider the recovery process and how communities heal following a disaster. When a disaster occurs, societies go through typical stages. No? There are 6 stages. Now, communities, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, sa US yan, go through 6 stages, beginning with disaster impact and ending with recovery. So, try natin explain to, but nonetheless, let's make it more fun, no? So, first stage, ano ba first stage? The announcement of the coming natural calamity, that's phase 1, and there is a period of uncertainty or worry, no? Kumpara ito, let's make an example. Kunwari, si Pedro ay napapansin ni Pedro na hindi na siya tinetext ni Maria. So that's phase 1, no? Nagtataka siya, nagkakaroon siya ng panghina ng kaisipan, no? Bakit hindi na nagte-text si aking mahal, no? So yun. Now, what's the second phase? The second phase is impact phase. It is the moment when the disaster occur. Nagkaroon na ng bagyo, naglandfall na, nagkaroon na ng earthquake. During this time, communities experience a broad spectrum of acute emotional reactions and numbness as they weather the storm. No? Of course, you couldn't feel, no? Kasi survival mode yan, no? Fight or flight reflex. No? So, ikumpara natin ng kay Pedro kanina na hindi nagte-text sa Maria. Sa impact, sa phase 2, no, yun na yung nakipag-break na si Maria. Nag-text na si Maria sa kanya. Break na tayo, may nahanap na akong iba. No? At first, anong mararamdaman? Masya-shock ka. No? Akala ko okay tayo, pero bakit ka nawala? No? So, yun yung phase 2. Now, phase 3, no? The disaster had receded, nawala na yung bagyo, no? Often known as, ito na tinatawag natin na heroic phase. So, anong nakita natin sa heroic phase? Phase 3, there is a high level of energy and a sense of collective charity defined, na na-define sa stage na to, no? So, nagkakaroon tayo ng rescue attempts and yung mga community, they rally together to support one another. Nagtutulungan, nagkakaroon ng bayanihan. Phase 3. So, i-compare natin kay Pedro, no? Nakipag-break na si Maria, no? So, phase 3, yan na yung he goes out with his friends, no? The friends comfort him, no? Huwag kang mag-alala. There's marami pang iba dyan, no? Yun ang sinasabi nila kay Pedro, no? That's phase 3. Now, this transitions into phase 4, the honeymoon period, no? So this is marked by high levels of communal togetherness and optimism, no? Disaster relief is frequently easily accessible and communities, they connect with one another throughout the reconstruction process, no? But danger here is this phase is only short, no? It's only brief, no? It will not last long, no? So that's the honeymoon period. Enjoy it as you can because you will not have this anymore. Balikan natin sa Pedro, no? So dito na nararamdaman na, kaya ko namang maging masaya kahit wala si Maria, no? Sino ba naman yung babae na makakahanap pa ako ng iba? Yun ang iniisip niya sa phase 4. Pero hindi na alam, nagkakaroon tayo ng phase 5. Phase 5, yun na tinatawag natin na disillusionment. Disillusionment, no? Bakit nawawala yung kanang illusion, no? So disillusionment or disenchantment, no? So communities and individuals, they recognize the limitations of their resources as well as the difficulties of rebuilding, no? So yung optimism ng phase 4 nawawala, no? Nagkakaroon ng tension at disillusionment, disenchantment dito sa phase 5, no? This is the most concerning phase for many experts in disaster recovery. And people frequently resort to less effective coping mechanisms, no? They go to substance abuse, some go to isolation, at some nagagalit sila. No, bakit di pa kami tutulungan ng gobyerno? Sabi no ay patatayan kami ng bahay, no? Ba't hindi na pa ba't wala na kaming pagkain, no? So that's phase 5, no? Balikan natin sa Pedro, ito na yung na-realize niya na mahal niya pa rin si Maria. No? So, yun, mahal niya pa rin si Maria. At yun, umiiyak siya sa pagtulog, umiinom siya para makalimot, pero sa totoo lang, mahal niya pa rin si Maria. No? So, that's phase 5. No? Now, phase 6, after a disaster, yung ambition at hope, no, ng isang community, doon na napupunta sa phase 6. Phase 6 is reconstruction. Individuals and communities, they begin to perceive progress in rebuilding effort during this phase. And the transition to a new normal starts. Typically, the reconstruction phase begins around the first anniversary or a short time afterwards ng disaster, and we go towards it, no? Phase 6, ito yung iniisip ng mga tao na babalikan nilang buhay after ng disaster, na nakabangon sila at yun na. Balikan natin sa Pedro, ang phase 6 sa kanya, naka-move on na siya, no? Of course, forever nang mamahalin si Maria, pero naisip niya, hindi na pwedeng maging sila. At sana, si Pedro, no, makahanap siya ng ibang may namahal, no? Of course, there's a possibility magbalikan sila ng Maria, pero baka phase 5 lang yan, kapatid, no? So move on, phase 6, no? So yun, I hope you understand the 6 phases, no, ng calamity. Nagbigay pa tayo ng example through breakup, no? Ulitin natin, phase 1, yan yung announcement na may calamity or you're expecting a calamity, that's phase 1. Phase 2, impact ng disaster. Phase 3, yan na yung nag-recede na yung disaster, nawala na, no? Yung tinatawag natin yung heroic phase. Phase 4, yun na po yung honeymoon period, no? Honeymoon period ng phase 4. Phase 5, yun na yung disillusionment, nawala ng pag-asa ang mga tao. But take note, there's still phase 6. Phase 6 is reconstruction, no? So, lahat naman tayo natutumba, lahat naman tayo, no, ay nagkakaroon ng pagkakataon na nasa lupa, no? Sagad, no? Pero hindi naman habang buhay na ganun. Ang buhay ay bilog, ang buhay ay isang parang kulong, at sana ay makabangon ka. Hindi naman ibig sabihin na kahit anong paraan, kahit tumakbo ka, kahit maglakad ka, kahit alam mo, even if you crawl, no, it doesn't matter. The more important thing is that when you fall down, you get up. No, when you fall down, no matter what, you get up. Now, we should be aware, or however, of na hindi lahat tayo ay nakaka-recover mula sa disaster. And we could say na madali lang naman magpatayo ng bahay, madali lang makapaghanap ng trabaho, pero yung mental state natin, yun ang kailangan natin mas bantayan. Kasi yan yung mas naapekto at yun yung long-lasting epekto na hindi natin namamalaya, no? And individuals affected by the tragedy, by the disaster, may notice that there are certain responses, no? And natitrigger siya pag pag malapit na yung anniversary ng disaster or may nagpapaalala sa kanila ng disaster, no? So ano ba yung mga ito? Feelings that are intense and unexpected. Kung bigla ka lang naiiyak kung may naaalala ka, or bigla ka nagagalit kung may naisip ka, no? Or tulala ka lang kasi may naalala mo yung sarili mo doon sa disaster na pagdaanan mo. And of course, meron din tayo tinatawag na alterations sa cognition and behavioral patterns. Dati masayahin ng bata, ayun hindi na, no? So yan. And of course, environmental sensitivity. Sensitivity sa strong noises, sa odors, no? Lalo pag earthquake na biglaan, mga ganun. And of course, nagkaroon din tayo ng strain, no, sa interpersonal interactions, no? hindi natin kayang makihalubilo sa ibang tao, hindi natin kayang makipagrelasyon sa gusto natin kasi nga na-trauma tayo dati. And of course, there are also some physical manifestations of stress. Di tayo nakakatulog, di tayo nakakain, aligaga tayo, no? We are anxious. So those are some signs that we should worry about, we should think about, and if you see yourself or if you see a loved one going on through this process, I think it's a good time to talk with them or to recommend them or yourself to talk to someone who is knowledgeable, a guidance counselor, psychologist, or just a friend, just a shoulder that you could cry on, just someone who could embrace you and assure you that everything will be alright. Hindi naman ibig sabihin na sira ulo ka pag meron ng mga ganito. No, it doesn't mean that. No, everyone needs help. Everyone needs someone to listen to. Yun lang sana. And I hope that hindi lang pag disaster but in difficult times you could find someone to talk with. You could find someone that you could confide your heart to, because that's golden. You find someone that you could talk to, that could comfort you, that has no agenda, but just your friend. And importante yan. You need someone to bear your heart, your soul with. Now, let's talk about this article that I saw. Nakita kasi natin dito na ayon sa CDC, it's a government organization in America, that there are children, sila yung at risk for mental issues after a disaster. Because after a disaster, children may experience anxiety, fear, sadness, sleep disruption, distressing dreams, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and anger outbursts. And it should help that we must learn the signs of children's mental stress to help them cope after a disaster. Now, experiencing a disaster can cause stress for families. Young children under 8 years of age are at a particular risk for mental health issues. Some children may develop disorders like anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder after a disaster. Now, stress and emotional problems affect children's physical health, quality of life, and how they do at home, in school, and in their communities. So, it's very important to keep children mentally and physically safe, both during and after a disaster. And adults, parents, or tayo, who are able to recognize the signs of children's mental stress can best help children cope and remain healthy. So, yun. Sana tayo, maging adults tayo na kailangan ng mga bata. At sana din, hindi natin sinasabi sa mga bata kaya mo yan, natutrauma yung mga yan, na-stress yung mga yan. Minsan kailangan natin silang kausapin. Madami silang emotions na nararamdaman. So we should help them understand what happened. Help them process those emotions. Help them na see na hey, it's a disaster, pero hindi ibig sabihin na hindi tayo mahal ng Panginoon. Hindi ibig sabihin na that you're a bad kid. No, it happens. The disaster happens. So that's that. Now, when disasters hit, we should know and we should understand and we should internalize that the bonds of community are what fuel the push to rebuild. Governments and others should help instill resiliency into the social fabric of communities. Of course, in addition to the usual resources, so that when disasters happen, recovery is within reach. Sana makita nyo yung connection ng first lessons natin on community engagement, community participation to now on how I discuss disaster risk reduction. The emphasis on community. Kasi we should understand that we are members of the community and we should do something for the community. And we should understand that we need to help make our communities more resilient. Either with community engagement, either with the different lessons that we have gone through over this subject. Now, we have here World Bank Group President Jim Yung Kim. Sinabi na ito actually sa isang TED Talk sa Sendai. Sa Sendai kasi, nandun kasi yung area ng Japan na na-hit ng March 2011 earthquake and tsunami. So, sinabi na it is possible to build resilience into our systems. that we should know empirically that communities that have a stronger social bonds do better during disasters. Yun ang sabi ni World Bank Group President Jim Yong Kim, no? That we should really think of the importance of family and friends during crisis, during disasters, because our family and friends, that's all that we have, no? At the end of the day, no matter how rich you are, no matter how popular you are, at the end of the day, it's your family and friends who will help you become a better person, who will be happy for you, and who will comfort you, no? And if strong yung ties ninyo, strong din ang ties sa communities, no? And yun din ang isa natin kaisipan, no? Pamilya natin ang komunidad, no? They are the extension of our family, and we should help one another, hindi lang pag may disaster, but during normal times, no? Be a good human person, no? Yun lang, no? Don't be wag kang medyo kontrabida, wag kang masyadong marites, no? Wag kang mapapel masyado. What you could do is, accept your community and try to embed yourself in the community and try to do something about it. And you strengthen the resilience of the community. Our lessons that we have talked about, you share it to them, no? You share to them the videos that you made about disasters, and you help your community become stronger because of the information that you have, no? So yun po, no? At yun nga, and that ends our video discussion for disaster risk reduction, no? And I hope that you learned something from it, and I hope that you will also, yung request ko kanina, you will share what you have learned to your communities, no? Kasi dapat pinaghahandaan ang isang disaster even before it strikes. So the time for preparation must be before the disaster, and we should do it right now, no? But nonetheless, I hope that if a disaster do ever strike you, I hope that your family and friends will become safe. I hope that you are prepared to take whatever disaster that you may have, no? Just as long as you guys, no, wag kakalimutan na for the reconstruction, for the rebuild to happen, you don't need natapakan ng ibang tao, no? We should work together, na hindi ito palamangan, hindi ito pataasan ng ihi, no? It's disasters are not time for politics. Disaster should bring out the best out of us. It should bring out, what makes us human. It should bring out the goodness of the human spirit, no? Yung bayanihan na tinatawag natin, yun dapat yung pinapakita natin sa disaster. Pinapakita natin yung service to our fellow men, to our fellow community, no? Yun lang naman, no? So you show service to other people, and that's good, no? So yun, thank you very much, and I hope you learned something from it, and yun lamang po. Have a good day, everyone.